This street dog never ate the food he was received until a man decided to investigate the reason and was horrorized by what he discovered. In the small town of Maplewood, among busy streets and market stalls full of colors and smells, there was a different dog. He didn't bark for nothing, he didn't beg for food like other street dogs, and he never stayed in the same place for too long. His name was Cooper. Cooper had no owner, but he wasn't completely alone either. He moved around the market, as if he were part of it, always finding a way to get something to eat. Among the traders there was a man named Tom, owner of a fruit stand and a generous heart. Every day he would set aside a piece of bread, a piece of meat, or anything else that could serve as a meal for Cooper. The dog accepted the gift with his eyes shining with gratitude, but there was something strange. He never devoured his food there and then, as a starving animal would. Instead, he picked up the food carefully and hurried away. It wasn't like he was scared or trying to protect his meal from other dogs. He went with purpose, as if he had a mission. At first, Tom didn't think much of it. Maybe Cooper would just like to eat somewhere else. But that started to happen every day. As soon as he got the food, the dog would disappear for a while and only return after a few hours, looking calm, but without any trace that he had eaten. This made Tom think, what's that dog up to? There was something about the way Cooper acted that didn't seem normal. He wasn't just any street dog. There was something behind that behavior, something Tom couldn't understand. One day, driven by curiosity, Tom decided to take a closer look. He prepared a generous piece of meat and handed it to the dog, as he always did. But instead of going back to work, he kept an eye out. Cooper took the food with the same care as always, and without even looking around, headed towards the furthest streets of the city. Tom, his heart beating faster than normal, wiped his hands on his apron and followed. He followed Cooper at a safe distance without making any noise. The dog walked steadily, avoiding people, ignoring other dogs, and going straight somewhere. He had a certain destiny. As he walked behind him, Tom felt something strange. It wasn't just curiosity. It was as if somehow that dog was about to show something important, as if Cooper's story was much bigger than it seemed. And then, after a few minutes of walking, Cooper turned a corner and disappeared into a dark alley. Tom hesitated. What would he find there? A hiding place? A nest of other dogs? A place where Cooper hid his food? Whatever it was, he was about to find out. Cooper was no ordinary dog. He had a secret, something no one could understand. But now you know part of the story. And I ask you, have you ever seen a dog act in a way that seemed to have a greater purpose? Comment below and tell me your story. I'll love reading it. And already subscribe to the channel so that this story reaches more people who love animals as well as we do. Tom has always been an observant man. I spent my days at the Maplewood market, paying attention to the movement of people, the flow of sales, the subtle changes in the city. And over time, he began to realize that Cooper was no ordinary dog. Since he first appeared, Cooper has never begged for food like other street dogs. He didn't bark, he didn't jump on people, he didn't get into the piles of debris scattered across the floor. He just expected. Every day at the same time, Cooper sat down near Tom's tent and stood there, motionless. His gaze was attentive, but not desperate. He didn't convey urgency or uncontrolled hunger. He just looked, waiting for the right moment. And Tom, perhaps instinctively, began to set aside food for himself. At first, it was just a piece of bread, a fallen fruit, a small piece of leftover meat. Cooper took the food delicately, holding it with his teeth in a careful, almost respectful manner. Tom has never seen a stray dog act like this, but it was only after a few weeks that he noticed something strange. Cooper, I never ate there. Every day he took the food and was going away. He didn't go away to find a quiet corner. He didn't hide. He's simply the party. Tom watched this happen over and over again and began to wonder why. Did Cooper have a hiding place? Did he save the food for later? Or could it be doubt haunted him? And then he realized something else. Cooper always came back. After a few hours, he reappeared at the market, walking calmly between the stalls, without showing any sign that he had eaten. He didn't lick his lips. He didn't show satisfaction. And that's when something started to bother Tom. If Cooper was just keeping the food for himself, he should have been calmer when he returned. But it wasn't. In fact, he seemed exactly the same. It was then that Tom understood. Cooper, I wasn't saving the food for. Later, I was taking it to someone. And when that idea settled in his mind, Tom knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. Tom was never the type to meddle in matters that weren't his. He always believed that everyone had their own secrets, their own battles to face. But that day, as he watched Cooper walk away with food in his teeth, something inside him screamed that he needed to know the truth. It was as if that dog was carrying a weight that no one else saw, an invisible burden that made it disappear every day, always at the same time, always with the same silent urgency. Tom couldn't ignore it anymore. As soon as Cooper turned to leave, Tom acted. Trying to appear as discreet as possible, he dropped his apron on the tent and began to follow him. His heart was beating fast. It was as if he was about to discover something important, something that would somehow change the way he saw that dog. Cooper walked steadily, not distracted by the smells of the tents or other dogs that crossed his path. He didn't dodge, he didn't stop. He knew where he was going, and that only made Tom's uneasiness grow. They left the market and entered narrower streets. Tom kept a safe distance, fearing that the dog would realize he was being followed, but Cooper wouldn't look back. He was focused. The people around seemed oblivious to what was happening. For them, he was just another stray dog wandering around the city. But Tom knew that Cooper wasn't wandering. He was going somewhere. With each block, the streets became quieter. The smell of fresh food and the buzz of the market faded, replaced by the distant sound of the wind blowing through the old buildings. The houses there were old, some with broken windows, others with graffiti-covered walls and rusty gates. Tom felt a shiver run down his spine. What could Cooper be doing there? Then, finally, the dog turned a corner and entered a dark alley. Tom stopped for a moment at the entrance. The alley was narrow, and the smell of damp mixed with trash permeated the air. The surrounding buildings blocked much of the sunlight, leaving the place shrouded in cold gloom. Cooper didn't hesitate. He went to the end of the alley, where there was a wooden box leaning against the wall. Tom frowned. Cooper stopped in front of the box, and with a care Tom had never seen before, he placed the food gently beside her. Silence settled in the alley, and then something inside the box moved. Tom felt a tightness in his chest. A golden snout emerged from the darkness, followed by a pair of tired eyes. It was a golden retriever, but not just any golden. Tom held his breath. The dog was lean, very thin. His fur was dull, dirty, with small knots of dirt accumulated. His bones were visible beneath the thin skin, and his eyes, there was something about them that made Tom's stomach turn. Tiredness, wear, a deep exhaustion that didn't just come from hunger, but from something much bigger. The golden retriever hesitated for a moment before lowering its head and beginning to eat. His movements were slow, almost painful, as if each chew took more energy than he had. Tom felt a lump form in his throat, and Cooper just watched. He stood there, motionless, watching his friend eat. There was no impatience, there was no frustration, just wait. It was then that Tom understood. Cooper wasn't just looking for food for himself. He was keeping that golden alive. Every day, Cooper went out onto the streets of Maplewood, ignoring his own hunger, facing the tiredness, the coldness of the people, the dangers of the city, everything to get back to that alley, everything to feed that dog. Tom felt a shiver run through his body. How many days had this been going on? How many times had he himself fed Cooper without imagining he was saving another life? The golden retriever finished eating and, exhausted, laid his head on his paws. Cooper approached, and, with a gesture so human it made Tom's eyes burn, he put his nose against his friend's. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. Era careful, era loyalty, era love. Tom felt his legs shaking. He had never seen anything like this before. I had heard stories about dogs helping other dogs, but seeing it with your own eyes was different. And then, as he watched Cooper closely, something hit him like a punch to the chest. That dog was suffering. Not physically. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't pain. It was something deeper. It was as if Cooper was fighting something Tom couldn't yet see. And for the first time, Tom knew he couldn't just turn around and go back to his tent, because now he was part of this story. What did you think of Cooper's attitude? Leave your opinion in the comments. Tom couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cooper standing next to the golden retriever, his gaze attentive, his patience infinite. The way he simply stood there, waiting for the other dog to finish eating, was something that never left his mind. Cooper wasn't just helping a friend, he was caring for someone who meant everything to him. The next day, Tom arrived at the market earlier than usual. He set up his tent as usual, but his mind was elsewhere. Who was that golden retriever? The dog looked like it belonged to someone. His behavior, although weakened, was not that of a stray dog that had always lived abandoned. He had a past, and Tom wanted to discover it. After a few hours of work, he walked away from the market and started asking around. Maplewood was a small town, and Tom knew that if that golden had an owner, someone would have to remember him. The first attempts were frustrating. Most people shook their heads, saying they had never seen that dog before. Some remembered Cooper wandering the streets, but no one seemed to know where he came from. It was only when he stopped to talk to a lady selling fabrics in a shop near the main square that something began to fall into place. "A golden retriever?" she asked, thoughtfully. "There was one here in town, but I haven't seen it in a while." Tom felt his heart speed up. "Do you know who it belonged to?" The lady sighed and wiped her hands on her apron. "Yes, it belonged to Mr. Henry Dawson, a kind man, already old. He lived alone in a house near the park. He loved that dog. I called him Charlie." Charlie. The name seemed to weigh heavily on Tom's chest. "What happened to him?" The woman sighed. "Henry passed away a few months ago. It was very sad. He and Charlie were inseparable. After he died, no one saw the dog again. Some said they took him to a relative, but I never heard anything more about him." Tom felt a chill run up his spine. Charlie belonged to Henry Dawson. Charlie disappeared shortly after his owner's death, and now he was there in a dark alley, slowly dying. Tom clenched his fists. What happened to him? How did he end up in that state? He thanked the woman and left with his head spinning. Now he knew who Charlie was. But there was still a mystery. How did he end up there? Tom spent the rest of the day trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The more I thought, the more everything seemed to make sense. Cooper and Charlie knew each other. They weren't just two dogs who met by chance. Cooper was looking out for Charlie because the two had a history together. But why? How did Cooper fit into this? Tom couldn't sit still. He returned to the alley in the late afternoon, eager to see Cooper and Charlie again. When he arrived, he found the usual scene. Cooper next to the golden retriever, attentive, vigilant. Charlie looked a little better after eating, but he was still weak. Tom knelt down slowly. "Charlie, that's your name, isn't it?" The golden looked up with difficulty. "And you, Cooper? How do you fit into this?" Cooper looked at him, but there was no answer. Just that deep look, filled with something that Tom still couldn't understand. But he knew one thing. That dog was there for a reason. And Tom wouldn't rest until he found out which one it was. Tom felt like he was getting closer to the truth, but the more he discovered, the heavier his heart felt. He spent the night thinking about Henry Dawson, the elderly man who loved Charlie and who, somehow, was at the center of that story. Now he knew that Charlie had had a home, an owner who loved him, someone who was by his side until the end. But there still remained a mystery. And Cooper? Tom had already accepted that that dog was not a simple street dog. Cooper had a past. His look, his way of acting, the way he took care of Charlie, that wasn't the behavior of a dog that was always alone. He belonged to someone, and Tom needed to find out who. The next day, after feeding Charlie and Cooper in the alley, he returned to the market with his mind full of questions. He already knew that Charlie was Henry Dawson's dog, but no one had mentioned Cooper. That meant either he never had an owner, or in some way was erased from history. He started asking about Cooper. Some people remembered him wandering the streets, always lonely, always distant, but no one could say how long he had been there or where he had come from. That's when Tom met Mr. Wallace, an elderly man who used to sell newspapers on the corner of the square. Wallace was one of Maplewood's oldest residents, and if anyone knew anything, it would be him. "Cooper?" Wallace frowned when he heard the name. "Ah, yes. This dog wasn't stray, not at first." Tom's heart sped up. "Do you know him?" Wallace sighed, looking at the floor for a moment before turning his tired eyes to Tom. He and Charlie were inseparable. They both belonged to Henry Dawson. Tom's stomach dropped. Was Cooper his too? Wallace nodded slowly. They were like brothers. Where one went, the other followed. Always together, playing in the park or sitting next to Henry while he read on the bench. Everyone knew them both. I've never seen such a strong bond between two dogs. Tom felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that Cooper and Charlie weren't together by chance. Cooper was taking care of Charlie because he was the only thing left of his old life. But if they both belonged to Henry, how did they end up abandoned? Tom asked Wallace, and the elderly man sighed. After Henry died, no one knew what would happen to the dogs. The man had no children or close family, just a distant relative who showed up when he found out about the inheritance. Tom was silent, feeling like he already knew where this story was going. The man took them both, Wallace continued, but not for long. He stayed at Henry's house for a few days, went through his things, then took the dogs and left. And then, Wallace pursed his lips and looked away. A few weeks later, I saw Cooper wandering the streets alone. I found it strange. I asked for Charlie, but he wasn't with him. And that man never came back. Tom felt his stomach sink. He abandoned them. Wallace nodded slowly. That's what everyone suspected. But no one knew where Charlie was, and Cooper, well, he survived alone. The words hung heavy in the air. Now everything made sense. Henry died. Your dogs were taken by a greedy relative. And then Cooper and Charlie were thrown out onto the street, discarded as if they were worthless. But something went wrong. They got lost. Or worse, Charlie was left behind. And Cooper never abandoned him. Tom felt a lump in his throat as he remembered the scene in the alley. The way Cooper brought food every day, the way he stayed by Charlie's side, making sure he wasn't alone. He wasn't just helping any dog, he was fulfilling a promise. Tom closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain the anger rising inside him. He thought about Henry, about how much that man would probably have suffered if he had known his dogs had been discarded like that. He thought of Charlie, languishing alone in that alley, and he thought of Cooper, roaming the streets, surviving, alone but never forgetting his brother. And now that Tom knew the truth, he couldn't just turn away, because if there was one thing Cooper taught every day, it was that some promises couldn't be broken. Tom never thought a dog could carry so much weight on its shoulders. He always believed that dogs lived in the present, that they didn't carry the past like humans did. But now, looking at Cooper, he knew he was wrong. That dog was fighting against time. After discovering that Cooper and Charlie belonged to Henry Dawson, the story became clear. Both dogs had lost their owner, their home, their entire life. Cooper was thrown onto the streets, forced to learn to survive on his own. But Charlie suffered an even worse fate. He was forgotten, and Cooper never accepted that. Tom couldn't stop thinking about what that dog had been through. While other street dogs just foraged for food, Cooper did something most humans would never do. He came back. For months, he roamed the city, streets, ignoring his own hunger, his own exhaustion, just to make sure Charlie had one more day. How many nights did Cooper spend alone, sleeping in some cold corner, because the only thing that mattered was making sure Charlie was still alive? How many times had he ignored his own pain because his friend's life was more important? Tom felt his heart sink every time he returned to the alley. Cooper was always there, by Charlie's side, watching, waiting, making sure he was okay. The golden retriever was still weak, but something in his eyes was beginning to change. As if after so long living on the brink of death, he was beginning to believe there was a chance. And all this because of Cooper. Tom began to notice details that he hadn't noticed before. The way Cooper licked Charlie's face every time he finished eating, as if he was checking to see if he was okay. The way it positioned itself next to the wooden box, like a silent guardian, ready to protect him from anything. There was a weight in those brown eyes, a weight no dog should carry. And Tom noticed something that made his throat tighten. Cooper. He wasn't just loyal, he felt responsible for Charlie. It was more than friendship, more than instinct. Cooper refused to leave him behind. Maybe it was because he knew what it was like to lose everything. Maybe it was because he knew Charlie wouldn't have survived without him. Or maybe it was because, deep down, Cooper was still waiting fix that. Perhaps he believed that if he could keep Charlie alive, then the life they lost would not yet be completely lost. Maybe Cooper was trying to save what was left of his family. Tom swallowed. What that dog was doing was something that few people in the world would be able to do. Cooper sacrificed everything, every day by Charlie. Tom wondered how many times Cooper felt hungry, but ignored it because Charlie needed it more. How many nights he spent at his friend's side, feeling cold, but refusing to leave him alone. How many days did he spend running around the city, facing indifferent looks, closed doors, extreme tiredness, just to find a piece of food. And then, when I came back to the alley, when I saw Charlie still breathing, he knew it was worth it. Because for Cooper, no sacrifice was too great. Tom felt his eyes burn. At that moment, he knew he couldn't let this continue. Because Cooper had been doing everything himself for months, but he didn't have to carry this burden forever. Tom looked at Cooper, who was there as always, watching Charlie. The dog had sworn a silent oath. He would never leave his friend behind, and now Tom would do the same. Tom knew he couldn't watch that happen anymore. Ever since he discovered Cooper and Charlie's past, Each day that passed made him more certain that he needed to act. Charlie was too weak. The time spent abandoned, fighting alone, had drained his strength. Even with Cooper at his side, even with all the loyalty in the world, that it wasn't enough. Charlie needed more. He needed real care. I needed a safe place, medicine, rest, and Cooper. Cooper needed understand that I was not alone in this. Tom took a deep breath that morning when he headed to the alley with a decision made. It wouldn't be easy. He knew that, but it was necessary. When he arrived, he found the same scene as the last few days. Charlie was lying in the box, frail, breathing hard, and Cooper, as always, was next to him, standing, attentive, protecting, always watching, always ready to make sure his friend wasn't left behind again. Tom knelt down, leaving the bag of food beside him. "No, Cooper." The dog looked up, and Tom felt that look weigh down on him. He knew. Somehow, Cooper, you knew that Tom was about to change something. Tom reached out and gently ran his hand over Charlie's head. The golden retriever opened his eyes for a moment, but then closed them again, exhausted. Tom felt a tightness in his chest. "You can't stay here anymore, boy." Cooper stood, still. Tom knew that dog wouldn't understand his words, but at the same time I felt like Cooper understood exactly what was going on. He picked up the phone and called the vet. When the car stopped at the entrance to the alley, Cooper stepped forward. His body stiffened. His gaze became more intense. "It's okay, buddy." But it wasn't. As Tom and the vet approached, Cooper growled lowly. He didn't advance, didn't attack, but your eyes said all. He didn't trust. I didn't trust those human hands to do anything good. He didn't trust Charlie to be safe without him. He didn't trust that Tom wasn't about to take him away and never come back. Tom felt his chest tighten. "You know me, Cooper. You know I just want to help." The dog remained where it was. He looked at Charlie, he looked at Tom, then he looked at the vet. His heart was divided, and Tom knew that this was the decisive moment. If he messed up now, he could lose Cooper forever. So, instead of trying to rush the situation, Tom took a step back. "Let's go together, okay? You and him, I promise." Cooper blinked slowly. His tail didn't wag. He was analyzing, thinking, and then he took a single step back. It was a small, almost insignificant gesture, but for Tom, it was the trial that Cooper was giving in. Carefully, he and the vet picked up Charlie and placed him inside the carrier. The golden didn't resist. He was too tired for that. Tom looked at Cooper. "Come on, boy. Let's go home." But Cooper didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the box. He saw when Charlie was placed in the car. He saw when Tom closed the door, saw everything. And then, before Tom could say anything else, Cooper turned and male Tom's heart skipped a beat. "Cooper!" But it was too late. The dog disappeared around the corner, its paws hitting the asphalt faster and faster. He ran away. Tom felt a tightness in his throat. He knew Cooper wasn't just running. He was going after something. Or maybe of someone. Tom never liked running. He always said that his entire life was made up of firm steps, of patience, of knowing the right time to act. But at that moment, he ran. His heart hammered against his chest as his feet pounded against the maplewood floor. Cooper was gone, and the only thing Tom knew was that I needed to find him. The image of the dog running away was engraved in his mind. He didn't hesitate, didn't look back. It was as if he already knew where he was going. And then, Tom understood. Cooper always had a destiny. From the first day he saw him at the market, from the mornings when the dog took his food and left, he always had a place to go. And now Tom knew where to look for him. He did not return to the market. He didn't go to the dark alleys or forgotten corners of the city. He went straight to Henry Dawson's old house. The sun was starting to set when Tom turned the last corner and saw the house. Time had not been kind to her. The windows were dusty, the wood on the porch was worn, and weeds grew around the rusty fence. It seemed like a place frozen in time, as if it was still waiting for its owner to bring life back to it. And there, sitting in the doorway, Cooper was there. Tom felt his heart tighten. The dog was there, motionless. His body was relaxed, but his eyes remained fixed on the closed door. He didn't look around. He didn't show impatience. He just waited. Tom approached slowly, feeling the weight of that moment. Cooper. The dog didn't move. Tom stopped a few steps away from him. The silence was almost overwhelming. The world seemed to have stopped there on that balcony. How long has Cooper been waiting? How many days did he return to that same place, lying down in front of the door, waiting for it to open? How many cold nights did he spend there, believing that if he stayed long enough, Henry would return? Tom felt a lump form in his throat. The dog didn't even look at him. It was as if he wasn't there, as if, at that moment, nothing else existed, other than that house and the memory it held. And Tom noticed something that made his chest hurt even more. Cooper. He hadn't run away. He had returned to home, because, for him, that was still the only place he belonged. Tom ran a hand through his hair and sighed. He felt the weight of that silence, felt every part of the invisible pain Cooper carried, because he had seen it before. In Charlie's eyes, when he was dying in that alley, in your own eyes, when you lost important people in your life. Grief was not just sadness. The grief was weight. It was the refusal to move on, the need to believe that things could go back to the way they were before. And Cooper was still waiting for Henry Dawson to return. Tom took a deep breath and knelt down next to the dog. Still, Cooper didn't move. "He's not coming back, boy." The words came out with difficulty. They felt wrong, too tough, but they were the truth. The dog continued looking at the door. Tom closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find the right words. But how did you explain death to someone who only knew unconditional love? How do you tell a dog that the world has changed forever? The wind blew through the trees, and Cooper finally blinked. Not because he had listened to Tom, but because his own body could no longer ignore reality. The door remained closed. The house remained empty. Henry Dawson. It was no longer there. Tom felt the weight of that moment. He wanted to pick him up, take him home, tell him everything would be okay. But I knew that wasn't how it worked. Because Cooper wasn't just a street dog, he was a dog that he had lost everything. And now, he needed to decide if he was ready to accept this. Tom reached into his pocket and took out a piece of bread he had brought. He broke off a small piece and placed it on the floor next to Cooper. "You don't have to wait alone." Cooper blinked slowly, but didn't touch his food. Tom didn't insist. He sat next to him on the porch, without saying anything else, just waiting. Because some pain, they don't need words. They just need to be shared. Tom was never a man to insist when someone didn't want something. He learned early on that some decisions needed to be made at the right time. But sitting on that porch, looking at Cooper motionless in front of the closed door, he knew he couldn't just walk away and wait for the dog to decide to follow him. Cooper. It wasn't just any dog. He wasn't just lost. He wasn't just a stray dog waiting for food. He was waiting for someone who would never come back. And how was this explained to him? How do you make a dog understand that the life he knew was over? Tom took a deep breath. He knew it wasn't enough to just reach out and call. Cooper wouldn't trust so easily. That wasn't a dog that followed just anyone. He was a dog that I had chosen to wait. Tom watched the way Cooper stood there, motionless, as if his own heart were trapped in that empty house. His gaze was fixed on the door. His breathing was calm but deep, as if he was trying to absorb every memory that still existed in that place. That was what hurt the most. Cooper didn't want a new home. He wanted the life he lost. Tom knew he could just take it by force. I could lasso him, carry him away, put a warm blanket around him, and feed him until he was healthy again. But that wouldn't change anything. Why, it wasn't Cooper's body that was trapped there. It was his heart. And this was something no one could just pull away. Tom ran a hand over his face and looked up at the sky. The sun was already setting, painting the horizon with shades of orange and blue. The wind was blowing lightly, bringing with it the smell of damp earth. He needed another approach. He needed to show Cooper that there was something worth leaving here for. And then he had an idea. He stood up slowly, feeling the stiffness in his own legs after sitting for so long. Cooper didn't even move. "I'll be right back, boy." The dog didn't react. He didn't need to say anything for Tom to understand what he was thinking. He didn't plan on leaving, but Tom wouldn't give up so easily. He walked back to town, his heart pounding in his chest. He was sure that his idea was the only way to make Cooper understand that the past could no longer be his home. He went straight to the veterinary clinic where Charlie was being treated. As soon as he entered, he saw the golden retriever lying on a soft blanket. He was still weak, but something in his gaze no longer seemed as dull as before. He was no longer the same dog dying in the dark alley. Tom crouched down beside him, rubbed his head and smiled. "Let's see an old friend." Charlie blinked slowly, as if understanding. The vet helped put him on a blanket and Tom carried him in his arms. The golden was too light, as if he was still carrying the weight of everything he had been through. But his eyes had life. and that's what Tom needed Cooper to see. The walk back to Henry's house was silent. Charlie snuggled into Tom's arms, and he felt the slow, gentle rhythm of his breathing. He was alive, and that, for Cooper, would mean everything. When Tom finally arrived at the house, Cooper was still there. The dog didn't even look when he came back. He was still in the same position, looking at the closed door, as if nothing in the world could get him out of there. But then, Tom slowly knelt down and placed Charlie on the floor, right next to him. The golden retriever staggered a little, still weak, but stayed on his feet. He took a deep breath, and then, for the first time in a long time, he saw Cooper. And it was at that moment that everything changed. Cooper, who had remained motionless all this time, turned around. His eyes, previously fixed on the door, were now elsewhere. He blinked as if he needed a second to understand what he was seeing. Charlie took a small step forward. His body was still shaking, but he moved. And then Cooper stood up, slowly, as if waking up from a dream, as if everything around him had finally broken in half. He took a single step forward. His body was tense, as if he wasn't sure what to do, but Charlie took another step. And then the two dogs were face to face. Tom held his breath. The golden retriever stuck out his nose, and Cooper did the same. They smelled each other for a few seconds, as if they were trying to recognize each other. And then Cooper nuzzled Charlie. It was a small touch, but loaded with everything that could not be said. Tom felt a lump in his throat. Cooper didn't look at the house. He didn't look at the door. This time, he looked at Charlie, and in that moment, Tom knew. Cooper finally understood. He no longer needed to wait alone. The first few days at Tom's house were strange for Cooper and Charlie. It wasn't the street, it wasn't the market, it wasn't Henry's house. It was something new. Charlie, still weak, spent most of his time lying down, recovering the strength that hunger and abandonment had taken away. Tom prepared nutritious meals, sat next to him while he ate, and monitored his every little progress. And every day, Charlie was starting to get better. His eyes, previously dim, began to shine again. His body, previously very thin, began to gain weight, and little by little, he started moving more again, exploring the corners of the house, wagging his tail when he saw Tom approaching. More Cooper. Cooper was different. He ate. I slept. He observed everything around him. But Tom saw something in her eyes that made him question whether Cooper truly believed this was home. The dog still had the habits of a street dog. He never lay down for long. He was always alert. I always waited, and that broke Tom's heart, because he knew Cooper was still fighting something inside himself. Did he really belong there? Or was it that, in some corner of Cooper's mind, he still thought this was all temporary? On the third night, Tom woke up and realized that Cooper was not inside the house. His chest tightened. He went downstairs and, looking out the window, saw the silhouette of the dog sitting in the yard, under the dim moonlight. Tom's heart ached. Cooper was looking at the horizon, not to the house, not for Charlie, but for something far away, something no one else could see. Tom walked out quietly and sat down next to him. The dog didn't move. The two stood there, under the moonlight, surrounded only by the sound of the wind. "You're still waiting for him, aren't you?" Cooper blinked slowly. Tom ran his hand over his face. "I don't know if the pain of loss goes away, friend." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "But I know that one day we will learn to carry it in a different way." Cooper didn't look at him, but for the first time he lightly rested his head on Tom's leg. It was a small gesture, simple, but for Tom, it was everything. It was the first time Cooper accepted that he no longer needed to carry everything alone. And, in that moment, Tom knew. The wait was finally over. Time passed. The cold of winter gave way to the gentle warmth of spring, and with it, life began to flourish again, not just in the city, but inside Tom's house. Charlie was no longer the same weak and weakened dog that Tom found in that dark alley. His golden fur, once dull and dirty, now shone in the morning sun. His steps, once hesitant, were now firm. He ran around the yard, played with Cooper, and, from time to time, looked at Tom with silent gratitude, as if he knew that all of this was only possible because someone chose not to ignore him. More Cooper. Cooper was still Cooper. He was never a noisy or lively dog. He never ran to the door wagging his tail when Tom arrived, nor did he throw himself on the floor asking for affection, but his presence was constant, always watching, always attentive, always there. He became the guardian of that house, not because he felt he needed to protect that place, but because, for the first time in a long time, he wanted to be there. But there was something that Tom noticed early. Every morning, Cooper disappeared for a few minutes. At first, Tom thought it was just a habit. Maybe Cooper would like to go for a walk before the day starts. But one day he decided to follow him, and it was then that he understood. Cooper walked alone through the streets, with calm steps, without rushing. He crossed the city, passing through the same corners he used to go to get food for Charlie, until he finally reached his destination, a Henry Dawson's old house. Tom stood in the distance watching. Cooper didn't try to get in. He didn't whine. He didn't scratch the door. He just sat on the porch and stayed there for a few minutes, looking at the empty house. And then, without ceremony, he got up and went home. Tom felt a lump in his throat. Cooper wasn't waiting any longer. He didn't go back there hoping to find Henry, nor under the illusion that the door would open. He came back to remember, to honor, to never forget the man who loved him, who loved Charlie, who taught them the meaning of loyalty. And Tom understood. Some loves never die. Cooper had moved on, but that didn't mean he needed to forget. And in that moment, Tom knew that that dog was never just a street dog. He always was and always would be a guardian. Charlie's guardian, Henry's guardian, and now, the guardian of a new home. Stories like this show us how much loyalty and true love can transform lives. If this journey has touched you in some way, imagine how many people still don't know the strength of this bond and the impact it can have. Now, you can be part of this change. Just subscribe to the channel and like the video. And if you think this story was exciting, just wait until you see what comes next. The next video brings an even more surprising event, one that remains in your memory forever. You won't want to miss it.